And September came along, first week of school, and suddenly I find out that there is a fellow by the name of Carlos Casillas and his friends, and that Carlos had dated Maribou for about 3 years. Well, I didn't know this. And suddenly, one day when I'm out running on cross country that year, back on a country road, a car runs up next to me, pulls out ahead of me, and, like five or six guys get out of the car, and they start chasing me. They start chasing me, and by the grace of God, I got away because there was a creek, and I ran down the creek and up the other side. I was in the crosshairs of someone who had totally judged me. Right? That's what judgment feels like. Hey, no one wants to be there. And maybe you've been in that place too, where someone else has judged you, never even given you a chance to explain yourself, but you're in their crosshairs. Scary place to be. Scary place to be. We don't want to give it. We don't want to be there. All right. So, what does Jesus say? What do we do about that? Okay. There are times, that we are so disappointed with someone, we'll still say, "I'm good. I'm going to judge you, and if you want to come judge me, I've got my act together." Jesus sort of anticipates that because we go there, and that's why he goes into the next verse. So we're going to look at Matthew 7:2. He says, "For in the way that you," and I'll add pass judgment, "you will be passed judgment upon. For by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you." All right? Now, listen to the way that I say that. For in the way that you pass judgment, right? Oftentimes we've read this or heard this, and we think it's about the process. How did I pass judgment? Well, I want to show you something. I want you to bring up a slide. Just because I feel like I need to do this one. This is this verse the way that Matthew wrote it in Greek. All right, and I'm going to show you something about this verse. Now I'm going to read it for you. So the first word is en hogar, krimati, krinete, kritiseste. Okay, and I told you krino is the word for judge. So you see there's 3 variants of the word up there. All right, so what it says there, it says, "For in that judgment which you judge, you will be judged." The word way is not in there. Okay? Now, our translators do good works with our translations, but sometimes because of the way that we hear a word, we can go down a different path. And the reason that I want to highlight this is because it's not the process that Jesus is highlighting here. It's the actual judgment. So when he says, "For in which judgment you judge," exactly the focus of your judge. Are you judging someone because they're not spending enough time with you? They're ignoring you? Are you judging someone because they're wasting money? Whatever that focal point is, what Jesus is saying is the person that you're interacting with, they're going to shoot right back at you with that. Right back at you at that. How many of you have experienced that? I know I have, right? Right? And you essentially have put up a dare. I dare you to find a place where I'm wasting money. And you know what? We're always going to fail. We will always fail. We'll always fail. And Jesus is going to explain why. So in the next slide, it's the same issue, and I'm not going to go through this, but it's the same issue with the standard. So with the standard that you measure, there is no concept of standard. If you look in there, it's metro, metriti, setiumen. So what it is then, again, it's the measurement. It's the measurement that you're using that you apply to someone else. They're going to apply the exact same measurement to you. So it's not which standard, it's the standard that you use. They're going to come back directly at you with that. So it doesn't matter which standard do you use, right? So I'll just challenge you. If you want to take someone else on because you believe they're being selfish, are you able to stand up to their scrutiny in your life about your selfishness, right? Now, before you answer that, Jesus is going to go a little bit further to give you a little more wisdom. Jesus is going to go, okay, so now, this also applies, by the way, in this see that last word up there that looks like it's umen? That means you all. It's the plural form of you. And what Jesus is saying, with the standard that you measure, it will be measured to you all. This also is true not only in interpersonal relationships, happens to be true in aggregate organizations. So if the church decides that we're going to judge someone else, they're going to fire it right back at them, at the church. And we know we've been guilty of that, right? There's a Baptist church that's going out right now and a picketing at grave sites of men who have gone down, men and women that have gone down in battle. Right? Crazy, right? And they're claiming a judgment against the country in that. You don't think that the hair on their back just doesn't go up right away? Absolutely does. Absolutely does. And they should be listening to this passage. They should be here. It's a different church, though, right? All right. So now, but where do we get this idea that we could be a self-appointed judge, right? Hey, it comes, right? Okay, we have these things. Just a warning. In this country, unless you've been appointed or elected a judge, you're not one. Okay, just to make that really clear. So if someone actually came to you and said you won the election, or a governor comes to you and says, I appoint you, or a president, or something like that, you're not a judge. Just to be that clear. Okay, but we have in our country things like citizen's arrest, right? Citizen's arrest? You mean I can actually go and stop someone and say, you're under arrest? Oh, right. See, that judgment stuff that comes from the civic arena, which Jesus doesn't negate, and Paul says, hey, that's good. That's for God's goodness to be legislated, right? We can move that somehow mistakenly into our own lives and say, well, I can make a citizen's arrest on you. You just broke one of Jesus' commands, and now I'm not going to trust you, right? We take that extra step. We make the mistake of thinking that because we're our brother's keeper, that we're our brother's maker, and we're not. We're not. You know? So, right, there's that common phrase that says, you're giving me all the responsibility without the authority, right? I mean, we hear that all the time, right? But with Jesus, what the Lord has done is He's created us to care for His creation, right? But He is the one who gives the calling. He is the one who understands and knows everything. And for us to be faithful to what we've been called to, we need to help and care for each other. So that's where we're going on this. Listen to what Paul says about interpersonal relationships. This is really interesting. 1 Corinthians 4. Paul had a lot of trouble because everyone wanted to judge him and say, Paul, you know what? You're just not making it. There's other apostles that are more eloquent than you, and maybe we won't take what you're saying. He says, I care very little if I am judged by you or by any human court. Indeed, I do not even judge myself. My conscience is clear, but that does not make me innocent. It is the Lord who judges me. Therefore, judge nothing before the appointed time. Wait until the Lord comes. Whoa. Think about that. That's also very freeing, so that when you feel like you're judged by someone else, to know that while their judgment may have some real implications in your life, ultimately it's the Lord who is our judge and matters about that. Okay. All right, so the summary of all of this, Jesus' first teaching on this, is that judgment for us is a boomerang. It's a boomerang. So if you're ready to get hit by what you throw out, go for it, all right? We will always fail when we judge another person in an interpersonal relationship, right? And this is why, and we take that next step, right? What happens is we fail, and the other person, when they judge us, they take the next step just like we do, and they step into condemnation and sentencing. And where does that leave us all? Where does that leave us all? No one wants to help anybody, because everyone's got a gripe against another person. It's a circular firing squad. It's bad. It doesn't accomplish anything good. That's what happens. That's what happens. So what we need to do is everyone that realizes that they're guilty, what everyone needs is a way out of their guilt, a way to be able to help. That's what we need. All right. Does that sound like a description of your relationships? People that, does that make sense? Yeah, it's gone there. So the short answer to the question is, what's a self-appointed judge to do? Don't go there. Don't go there in your interpersonal relationships. You just don't need to do that. And we're going to talk about ways that we use the capability that God's given us but for good ends, good ends. Okay, so let's look at that next verse so that Jesus shows us how to break the cycle of judgment. All right. He says, why do you look at the speck that's in your brother's eye, but you don't notice the log that's in your own? All right, so here's the first reality that Jesus is saying, is that sin in your life, sin in my life, it actually corrupts our perception. Think about that. That's huge. If there's sin in your life, you can't see right. I can't see right. Because look what happens here. Notice that it's, see, what Jesus is talking about here is not being self-righteous. You know, when you see a speck in someone's life and you don't see the log, it's not being self-righteous. It's being blind. It's being unable to see. Look, it's Jesus, not the accuser, that calls it a speck. Right? Because if the accuser called it a speck, they wouldn't make a fuss about it. Right? Sin has distorted reality for the accuser. Now look at Jesus' next statement. It's Jesus that calls it a log. Right? It's not the accuser, because if the accuser saw it was a log, he would repent. Right? For the accuser, sin has blinded them to their own sin. Ah. Whoa. You know where we're going with this, right? So what are the sins in your life that blind you to what you're doing in your life? You know, we talked a few weeks ago about different offerings that Israel would make. There was an offering for sins that you didn't know you committed, but you committed nonetheless. All right, so, you know, we see that in people's lives, right? I mean, you can look at it in our men's Bible study this week. We were looking at David. David loves his son. This is so easy for us to do. We love our children. And we can make an idol of our children, sad as it sounds. And David had this incredible love for Absalom, his son, who basically wanted to take over the throne and would have destroyed Israel. And David can't stop himself, and he can't even see the problem that he has with Absalom. It takes one of his generals to come and make the issue plain to him and to get him to be where he should be. Right? David could be blinded. We can be blinded as well. All right, so Jesus continues. He says, how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, and behold, there's a log in your eye? I've got a picture up here to demonstrate this. Lego men. Let me take that speck out of your eye, and the next slide. Ah! Can you imagine a surgeon coming up to you, a surgeon, right, and saying, let me take that out? And the surgeon's got this huge thing blocking his view. That's what Jesus is saying. That's why he follows up with the word hypocrite. And hypocrite at that time meant pretender. It's what we would say, as if you could do that. Be real. Now look, the reality is that we all know people in our life, in our relationships, who if they asked to help us, we would say, no thank you, because we know what's going on in their life. And even they may not be able to see it, but we can see it, right? You see what that's doing? That's blocking the calling of God for us, to be a help to each other, to care for each other, right? So that's what's going on there. So, first things first, we got to cast out sin. Jesus uses this word that is this. It's this word called ekbalo, where we get the word ball. Throw it out. It's a command. It's intentional. It's not a suggestion. Jesus is not suggesting you might want to cast sin out of your life. It's a command.